Starting this one already sweaty. I just washed the car. It was pretty dirty, and now that it's clean, I've done the inside and everything. It's time for the next big step, which is I'm actually going to install a trailer hitch on this thing. And I know that sounds kind of dumb for a Corvette, but I'm installing just a small trailer hitch that was made by E-Trailer to fit this specific car, so I could throw mountain bikes on the back and make this kind of an adventure car. I was thinking about how fun it would be to take this thing tops off, like through the mountains or through the desert, and do a camping trip and maybe some biking as well. So I've got a trailer hitch mount basically that just arrived here, and I'm gonna pop it out of the box and see if it should bolt on. That's what it says, but we'll see how this goes. I've got the trailer hitch box open, and I'm just pulling this out for the first time. Here's our E-Trailer.com box, and first piece I see looks pretty simple. It's a little dirty, so I may wipe it down before I put it on. Not that it's really gonna matter, it'll be under the car. So what I'm gonna do is just see if I can cut off this cardboard and plastic that's on there. Is there anything else in this box? I was hoping maybe some instructions. No instructions. Well, we're gonna figure it out. So this little bundle on the end was not just to protect it, it's also holding all the hardware that's gonna go on there as well. And so that's good news. Got all the bolts and everything, washers, I can see them in there. All right, in this little bundle. I've got our hitch wiped down just to get some of the dust off of it. You can see it's like hurt. I'm not sure who they are, but these are the capacities of it. Now all I'm holding at any given point on this thing is gonna be 2 mountain bikes. So I really didn't need much in terms of capacity, just enough to hold a bike rack and 2 bikes. When I open that little bundle up, here are all the parts I got. I've got a couple of big squares, or spacers or washers. It's like some kind of U-bolts, 2 big bolts, and various other washers and lock washers, as well as, ooh, it's like a little set of instructions. Awesome. So I'm gonna take a look at those and see how this install is supposed to go. So here's how this thing's actually gonna sit on the car, right? It'll be upright. These 2 at the ends holes are gonna mount underneath the car to hold it in place, and then I'm actually gonna have to come up from underneath in these 4 positions and drill using this as a template into the frame of the car to make holes that'll actually bolt it more securely to the car. So here's what we've got between our instructions and our materials. We've got these 2 U-bolts, as well as these 2 other bolts. These are the ones that are gonna go at the end to hold it in place while I'm working on it. These are just our flat spacers, regular washers, lock washers, and these 4 nuts. So here's what the installation guide says. It's got this little picture, and you can see it's sitting upright. It's actually this whole unit sitting upright, just like I had it on the ground. And this first step says remove the 2 lower inside bolts of the bumper. I haven't seen where those are yet. I haven't actually gotten under the car today. Install the hitch in the car by first mounting at EA struts, using the fasteners in 2 places shown. So I think what they're talking about here is that this side and this side, I'm gonna basically hold up and in combination send one of these bolts right there with a lock washer, then a regular washer, then one of those spacers, and I guess use that somehow to mount it using this U-bolt. I'm not really sure what I'm doing here yet. I'm gonna have to figure it out a little bit. There's a note down here that says for 75 and 76 models will require blind installation of U-bolts, see diagram. So here's this diagram, and that applies to me since this is a 76. Or I'm not really sure. I guess I'm gonna feed it through and try to do it by feel while it's inside the frame. And then here where I'm gonna actually be drilling holes. You can see I'll be drilling up using this thing while it's held in place as a template. These 2 holes, 2 on each side. And then using this combination of fasteners provided, I guess I'm gonna be bolting it in. Not totally as straightforward as I thought, and I wasn't aware I was gonna have to drill in, but luckily I've got a drill and a 1/2-inch drill bit that I think should do the job, and some safety goggles since I'll be laying underneath metal that I'm drilling into. So I'm gonna get myself under the car and see what everything looks like down there, see if I can make a little more sense. This is just, that's it for instructions. It's those 4 steps in that 1 diagram. So we'll see how this goes. Time to get under the car. So what I've done is chalked off the front wheels to be safe. Of course, the car's in park, the e-brake is on. I've also opened up both doors just so that they're not latched, and then pulled the hood latch to release that as well. It's just something I've read when you're lifting the C3s that you're supposed to have the doors and hood unlatched. I think it just gives it a little bit of room to flex or something. under the load. Not totally sure why, but it sounds like it's a little safer that way. So what I'm gonna do now is, now the wheels are chalked, the car's parked, I'm gonna throw my floor jack underneath it, try to find a good spot on the frame in the rear of the car, and lift up the rear, and then throw some jack stands under it, give it a good shake, make sure it's safe, and then get myself underneath it to have a look at where this trailer hitch is actually gonna go. Let's get after it. Look at this monster truck looking Corvette way up in the air. That's so funny, but I went ahead and got it jacked up. So I've got a 4-ton jack stand on each side, sitting here holding it. We've got the wheels chalked in the front. May as well go ahead and kick those in, make sure they're right where I want them. And what I'm gonna do now is give it a good hard shove, because if it can't take that without budging, good. I don't want to be underneath it. So it feels real solid. I've got jack stand on this side. And also, just for double safety, I put the jack itself just barely touching. You know, the jack's not the thing supporting the weight. I would never go under a car that's only supported by a jack, because those do give out. But the jack stand, I trust. The jack's there just for a little bit of insurance. That was more of a process than it probably should have been, but I was able to remove the first 2 bolts I need to take out. It's kind of funny seeing how tapered the ends are. Basically, I found on eTrailer's website, they had a video of this whole installation process, which is amazing. I feel like I have an approach and I know what I need to do now. So what I did is I got under, and basically next to this tailpipe underneath here, there it is, where you're seeing that 1 bolt, there were 2. And so I removed the lower of each. And what I'm gonna do is basically slide that top wide part in above the exhaust on each side. You sort of have to go up one way, then up the other, then let it rest down. And it should hold itself more or less into place, which is gonna allow me to drive these with a stack of, so basically I'm gonna go the locking washer on first, followed by flat washer, followed by a spacer. And this is the new hardware that's gonna replace this rusty old bolt that I took out before. These actually weren't that rusted other than the exposed ends. But this is gonna bolt into that same spot in the chassis and hold that thing up in place. And then once it's held in place, I'm actually gonna take my jack and just press it just slightly up to where I can use those vertical holes as a template to drill my holes. And this looks like it's gonna be more straightforward than I thought. I was getting a little intimidated at first, but that video was so helpful. So here we go. I slid this up underneath, and it's just basically hanging on these 2 tailpipes underneath there, but you can see about where it's gonna go. Of course, this will press up until it's flush with the frame, but this is where the tongue receiver will stick out. And so what I've gotta do, it's so nice that this actually holds itself into place on one side while I'm doing the other, because I've done a trailer hitch install before where with one person it was an absolute nightmare. So what I'm gonna do is get under there, and on this side first, I guess, put the new hardware in where the old bolt was, and then swing over here, put the other hardware in, and then once they're both installed, I'll tighten it down to spec. This thing is feeling solid, but both those bolts went in fairly easily. What I did is just went in, finger tightened one just a little bit, finger tightened the other a little bit till they're balanced, and I got them both as far in as I could, just going finger tight before I put the wrench in, because I wanted to keep it even. I didn't want to fasten one down and have it cockeyed or something. And but then I went ahead and torqued it down, and already, I mean, you can see it's pretty hidden away. Like, this is, I love that it was designed just for this car. It feels fairly solid, you know, obviously, but I've got a lot more hardware sitting around, which means I'm not done yet. And so I'm gonna continue the install process. Now is onto the part where underneath here, there's actually these 2 holes that are right here and here on each side. So there's 4 total, and they're already lined up pretty well with the frame. But what I'm gonna do is use my floor jack to just hold this up in place. Not that it feels like it has any give, but we'll try it. And then drill a hole, a just slightly undersized hole actually, but I'm gonna punch a hole in each of those, and then somehow I'm gonna have to get a U-bolt in there and line it up. That's that blind U-bolt installation step that they mentioned. So hopefully that goes smooth. I imagine that's gonna be a little bit of a hassle, but this is going well so far. It is an embarrassing number of hours later, but this thing is completely finished. So it seemed pretty straightforward in terms of drill those 2 holes, drop the U-bolts in. First 2 holes with the new hardware replacement, you know, one over by this tailpipe, one over by this tailpipe. That one's super easy, and that was really nice the way that the the trailer hitch receiver sort of held itself into place while I was working. That was great. And it mounted right up to where I could use the pre-drilled holes as sort of a guide for where to drill my 2 holes into the frame of the car. So I drilled my first 2, and then this is where the issues started. So basically I drilled my first 2 holes and then noticed another little note in the instructions I had missed on my first couple of reads. That was to ignore these little spacers if you had a 77, or I guess earlier than the 77 vet. This is 76, so of course I didn't need these. I had the spacer in place when I drilled the holes, which meant my holes were going to be off to the side by the thickness of this spacer. That part ended up not being a huge deal. Basically, I just pulled all the hardware out on one side at a time, removed the spacer, put it back in, and my holes still pretty much lined up. I mean, they were a little bit oversized anyway, so that was totally fine. So I removed these, and then I'm looking at this thing, and that note in there about, you know, this is going to be a blind bolt. Basically, the U-bolt's got to go in blind through the frame. So I've done this once before where I wrapped wire around the bolt I needed and sort of fed it through the frame of the car and dropped it in. Then just very careful not to shove it back up, threw a little nut on there to keep it in place, and trying not to shove the nut back up into the frame, because once you do that, I mean, it's pretty much game over. It's a real headache to try and get a nut out of the frame of a car. So I was trying to be super cautious, and I was like, basically I was trying to run wire through there, and I could not get, for the life of me, anything through. It's a long way, all the way from basically here to there. I would have to had run wire and blindly fed that U-bolt through and try to get it to drop into place before I could thread a nut on to hold it there. And it wasn't going well. I looked at maybe just actually buying a different fastener, like a blind bolt that goes up and then flanges out and then locks itself into place. But ultimately what I ended up doing was I was like, I wonder if I could feed this U-bolt around, just feed it up through the bottom. And it wouldn't fit, obviously, it couldn't make the bend, but that was with the thickness of the trailer hitch receiver in place. So I ended up just dropping one side down to expose the 2 holes I had already drilled. Now they're in the right spot because I had it up into place initially, and the U-bolt fit right through and it dropped into place. And I was able to then swing that side back up really quickly, throw a nut just finger tight on there to keep the bolt from getting pressed up into the frame. And then I went around to the other side and did basically the same thing. It was a little harder that time. I had to just oversize my holes just a little bit to get it to make the bend around, but I was able, instead of having to go in from the side and drop it in, to just go from the bottom with this U-bolt and feed it in and then rotate it till it dropped into place and I could thread something on. And so from there, it was just a matter of very careful not to press it up into the frame, tightening everything down, and here's where we ended up. So if you look under the car, you'll see there's my new hardware. On one end, this was the easy part, right? That was just replacing hardware. And then here is the U-bolt situation. So there actually is a bolt that runs up into the frame and back down, and I had to drill 2 holes into the frame of this car to make that happen. But everything has been torqued down and it feels really solid. I mean, I can yank on this thing, it's not going anywhere. It feels like it's part of the frame of the car at this point, which is awesome. So I'm gonna take it off jacks and take a much needed shower, but that was a lot of fun. All that work, totally worth it. We got both mountain bikes loaded up on this thing. Hilarious to see a classic Corvette with 2 mountain bikes and a bike rack on the back, but this is the reason I did it. I just actually rebuilt, this is my old high school mountain bike. I totally tore it down, sanded it down to the frame, and gave it a fresh paint job. We named it Luna. Came up with this little icon here with the little rock climber and mountains, and had new cabling done at the shop. I rebuilt everything else, and it's got, you know, fresh brake lines, fresh shifting lines. It's dialed in and riding better than the day I bought it. But what a fun little adventure car this has turned out to be. It's a little bit ridiculous, but it's a lot of fun. There it is, right there. More fun.